Hollywood has seen its share of heartbreaking stories, but few cut as deep as the tragedy of Dorothy Dandridge. She was dazzling, one of the first black women to break through as a true superstar, an Academy Award nominee whose talent and beauty seemed destined to change the industry forever. Yet behind the applause was a life unraveling, marked by guilt, discrimination, and devastating misfortune. How did a woman with the world at her feet end up dying at just 42, with only $2 to her name? This is the tragic fate of Dorothy Dandridge, and it's a story that will leave you in tears. Dorothy Dandridge's rise was groundbreaking, but it came at a heavy cost. She performed in glamorous hotels where she herself wasn't even allowed to stay the night, and she rejected the stereotypical roles offered to black actresses at the time. Her struggle to be accepted in white Hollywood blazed a trail for future generations, but the constant uphill battle weighed heavily on her personal life. When asked about prejudice, Dorothy once said, "It is such a waste. It makes you half alive. It gives you nothing. It takes away beauty, personality." She truly was in a class by herself. A gifted actress, singer, and performer, she became Hollywood's first African-American dramatic leading lady, a force on stage and screen whose charisma earned her international fame and an Academy Award nomination. But behind the sophistication and elegance, she wrestled with self-doubt and deep insecurities. As one admirer later said, "She should have been the most successful movie star in the world. But she was a black woman at the wrong time." Her story began in Cleveland, Ohio. In November 1922, Dorothy Jean Dandridge was born to Ruby Dandridge, a determined and ambitious woman, and Cyril Dandridge, a quiet and introverted man. The marriage quickly soured. Ruby left with their first daughter, Vivian, and soon gave birth to Dorothy. She scraped by working as a maid but devoted her free time to chasing her true passion, entertainment. Ruby nurtured her daughter's talents, and with the help of musician Geneva Williams, turned their household into a training ground for performers. By the time Dorothy was 4, she and her sister were singing and dancing at church. Soon, they were touring the South as the Wonder Children, their talents supporting the entire family. Dorothy's charm made her an audience favorite, though the hardships of constant travel left her anxious and insecure. Schooling was interrupted, and for years she relied on memorization to cover the fact she couldn't read well. When the Depression forced the act to retire, Ruby saw Hollywood as their salvation. She reinvented her daughters as part of the Dandridge sisters, a glamorous trio whose harmonies carried them from movie appearances to the Cotton Club in New York. By 1938, they were performing alongside legends like the Nicholas brothers. Dorothy, still only 15, stood out as the undeniable star. When Dorothy Dandridge first met Harold Nicholas of the famed Nicholas brothers, he was just 17, already a seasoned performer and notorious ladies' man. But Dorothy had little time for romance. After 12 years of relentless training and performing, her career was finally beginning to pay off. In May 1939, the Dandridge sisters, with Geneva Williams as their chaperone, sailed to London for a prestigious engagement at the world-famous Palladium. They captivated European audiences, dazzling them with their polish and charm. Yet behind the curtain, Dorothy was becoming exhausted. The pressures of live performance weighed heavily on her, compounded by Geneva's suffocating control. Obsessed with protecting Dorothy's innocence, Geneva even taped down the 16-year-old's developing figure, and in one disturbing incident, physically assaulted her under the guise of protection. For Dorothy, it was a breaking point. She finally stood up for herself, reclaiming her independence from the woman who had dominated her life. Empowered for the first time, Dorothy returned to the United States determined to go solo, not just as a singer, but as an actress. In 1940, she won a part in the hit Los Angeles stage revue, Meet the People. Though the production was largely white, Dorothy's audition broke barriers, proving that a young black woman could hold her own on a mainstream stage. The opportunity marked the beginning of her acting career and effectively ended the Dandridge sisters as a trio. Still, Dorothy's family leaned on her for financial support. She took whatever roles she could find, including a small part as a servant girl in Lady from Louisiana, 1940, starring John Wayne. But her real break came in 1941 with Sun Valley Serenade, a lavish 20th-century Fox musical starring Sonia Henney, Milton Berle, and the Nicholas brothers. Harold Nicholas, now engaged to Dorothy, persuaded studio executives to feature her in a show-stopping number. Her beauty and talent lit up the screen, and audiences took notice. By 18, Dorothy Dandridge seemed poised for stardom. She appeared in a string of short soundies, early musical films shown on jukebox screens, that highlighted both her voice and her striking presence. In many ways, they were precursors to the modern music video, and Dorothy was already becoming a star of the format. It looked as though all her dreams were about to come true, though she could not yet know the immense price that success would demand. By the early 1940s, Dorothy Dandridge was gaining confidence in her career and ready to settle down with her longtime boyfriend, dancer Harold Nicholas. On September 6, 1942, just weeks before her 20th birthday, the two were married. Dorothy entered the union with hopes of domestic bliss, but reality quickly proved otherwise. Harold's passion for golf was so consuming that even his family teased him about it. "Your brother thinks more of golf than he does of me," Dorothy once confided to a relative. But golf wasn't the only distraction that kept him away from home. By his own admission, Harold was too young to be tied down, chasing women and living the carefree life of a performer on the road. "I think I was too young to be married at that age," he later admitted. Left alone much of the time, Dorothy leaned on her sister-in-law, Geraldine Pate Nicholas, who became both a confidant and close friend. "We were good friends from the start," Geraldine recalled. She was sweet, generous, and lovely. Professionally, Dorothy picked up small roles in films like Lucky Jordan, Drums of the Congo, and Hit Parade of 1943. But her real focus was on starting a family. When she discovered she was pregnant, she believed her prayers had been answered. Dorothy was willing, even eager, to give up her career to be a full-time wife and mother. In September 1943, while 9 months pregnant, she went into severe labor pains. Believing it was a false alarm, Harold left her with Geraldine and went to play golf. Hours passed before Geraldine found a car to rush Dorothy to the hospital, but by then it was too late. The following day, Dorothy gave birth to her daughter, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas, known as Lynn. At first, baby Lynn was the light of her parents' lives, but by age 2, it was clear something was wrong. She had violent tantrums, failed to recognize her parents, and lagged in development. Doctors eventually diagnosed her with permanent brain damage, caused by a lack of oxygen at birth. The news devastated Dorothy. Consumed with guilt, she sought psychiatric counseling and turned increasingly to prescription sedatives. Meanwhile, her marriage with Harold deteriorated further. His absences grew longer, and Dorothy, overwhelmed and heartbroken, spiraled into despair. On one occasion, she overdosed on pills and had to be rushed to the hospital to have her stomach pumped. Dorothy Dandridge insisted her first overdose had not been a suicide attempt, blaming it instead on carelessness. But when she was discovered several more times in dangerously overmedicated states, it became clear that her polished exterior concealed a woman deeply wounded by grief and guilt. With her daughter Lynn's disability now undeniable and her marriage to Harold Nicholas collapsing, Dorothy was forced to confront the truth. Her personal life was in ruins. After 7 difficult years, she asked Harold for a divorce. Harold later admitted, "I take the blame for it because I was not man enough to stand up." I was too young, but his remorse did little to ease Dorothy's burden. Caring for Lynn fell entirely on her shoulders. The child required round-the-clock supervision, and Dorothy had no choice but to place her in full-time care, an arrangement that was both emotionally devastating and financially overwhelming. To provide for her daughter, she focused with new determination on advancing her career. In 1948, Dorothy became one of the first black students at the Actors Lab in Los Angeles. Immersed in its creative, progressive environment, she refined her skills and befriended fellow rising stars like Anthony Quinn. But even there, prejudice followed her. After she danced with Quinn at a benefit, gossip columnist Hedda Hopper reported on the scandal of a black woman dancing with a white man, stoking outrage in the Los Angeles Times. Dorothy refused to bow to humiliation. In a bold rebuttal published in the California Eagle, she condemned the racist commentary. Her poise and courage won admiration in Black Hollywood, elevating her as a symbol of dignity and progress in post-war America. Still, opportunities for black actresses remained scarce, even as Hollywood began to wrestle with race in films like Pinky and No Way Out. With little choice, Dorothy returned to the nightclub circuit. She hired composer Phil Moore, a former Cotton Club colleague, to craft her act. He oversaw every detail, her songs, her makeup, her wardrobe. Moore favored tight, form-fitting gowns he called snaky dresses, designed to accentuate her allure. Under his guidance, Dorothy shed her ingenue image and transformed into a sultry chanteuse. Their professional relationship soon turned intimate, and the two began living together. Audiences adored her. Clubs sold out, critics raved, and Dorothy seemed poised for stardom again. But beneath the glamour, her old anxieties never left. Stage fright haunted her, and deep down she longed not for smoky cabarets, but for a triumphant return to the silver screen. By 1950, Dorothy Dandridge was 28 and still searching for the breakout role that would prove her worth in Hollywood. That year, she accepted the part of an African queen in Tarzan's Peril, opposite Lex Barker. The Hollywood Censorship Bureau bristled at the film's sensual undertones, but the controversy only worked in Dorothy's favor. The attention catapulted her into the spotlight and earned her a place on the April 1951 cover of Ebony magazine. Soon, she was also appearing in mainstream publications like Look and Life, proof that her beauty and charisma could captivate both black and white audiences. Her growing star power, guided by Phil Moore, led to high-profile bookings at elite venues, including the Café Gala in Los Angeles and London's exclusive Café de Paris, both traditionally reserved for white performers. She was breaking barriers night after night, dazzling audiences with her sultry presence and magnetic voice. Hollywood began to take notice. MCA, one of the industry's most powerful talent agencies, signed her and quickly secured a string of television appearances, including a performance on Ed Sullivan's Toast of the Town. Dorothy was climbing higher than any African-American actress before her, but she knew there were still greater hurdles to clear. In 1952, her acclaimed nightclub act opened the door to her first true starring role in a major studio production. MGM cast her in Bright Road, directed by Gerald Mayer, nephew of studio mogul Louis B. Mayer. Dorothy played a compassionate small-town school teacher determined to help a troubled student, and opposite her was a rising young actor named Harry Belafonte. On set, Dorothy proved herself more than just a glamorous nightclub star. She was professional, poised, and deeply convincing as a dramatic actress. Crew members admired her composure, while co-stars praised her ability to carry emotional weight with elegance. One colleague later described her simply, "She was absolutely beautiful in such a classy way." She was perfect. For Dorothy, Bright Road was more than just a film role. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that promised to finally showcase her as a serious Hollywood leading lady. On the set of Bright Road, Dorothy Dandridge not only earned the respect of director Gerald Mayer, but also his affection. There was an engaging quality to her, he later recalled. She was easy to talk to. It was a relationship I'll always remember. It was really quite wonderful. Though Bright Road failed at the box office, Dorothy was still at the top of her game as a performer. She was soon headlining at the Last Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas. But the city in the 1950s was deeply segregated. No matter how famous a black performer was, or how much they were paid, they were barred from staying in hotels, using elevators, or dining in restaurants reserved for white guests. Dorothy dared to challenge the system. When she demanded a room at the Last Frontier, the hotel reluctantly lifted its ban to accommodate her. But when she asked to use the pool, management suddenly declared it closed for repairs and drained the water. The message was clear. On stage, she was treated like a goddess, but once the lights went down, she was forced out the back door. During her time in Vegas, Dorothy began a romance with rising Hollywood star Peter Lawford. Their relationship was passionate, but doomed. Lawford admitted to her that, as a working actor, he was financially dependent on the Hollywood machine, and their interracial love affair would never survive under its scrutiny. Heartbroken, Dorothy had to let go. Though adored by audiences, Dorothy's confidence was unraveling under the weight of failed romances. Lonely and depressed, she turned again to alcohol and prescription pills. Still, work remained her refuge. In 1953, Hollywood was abuzz with plans for Carmen Jones, a bold all-black adaptation of Bizet's classic opera. Dorothy knew the title role was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but director Otto Preminger was skeptical. He dismissed her, claiming she looked too Saks Fifth Avenue to embody the earthy, fiery Carmen. Furious but determined, Dorothy transformed herself. With darker makeup, tousled hair, and a more sensual presence, she presented herself again. And this time, Preminger was convinced. "It's Carmen," he declared. Cast opposite Harry Belafonte, Dorothy brought to life a femme fatale who seduces and destroys. Though both leads' singing voices were dubbed by trained opera singers, nothing could diminish Dorothy's magnetic screen presence. Her performance was mesmerizing, smoldering, sensual, and utterly unforgettable. With Carmen Jones, Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte became America's first black sex symbols, shattering Hollywood's old boundaries. But for Dorothy, the triumph was only the beginning of a journey that would take her to unimaginable heights and devastating lows. Among the cast of Carmen Jones were Pearl Bailey and a young newcomer named Diane Carroll. Carroll later recalled the awe she felt watching Dorothy Dandridge work. "I sat there. I watched her. I watched her find her art in front of the camera, and that's quite a privileged position." When Carmen Jones premiered on October 28, 1954, it was both a critical and commercial triumph. Virtually overnight, Dorothy became a bona fide movie star. Her smoldering performance not only earned her widespread acclaim, but also the historic distinction of becoming the first black woman to appear on the cover of Life magazine. Still, nothing compared to the moment she learned she had been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, the first African-American ever to receive such an honor in a leading role. On March 30, 1955, Dorothy attended the Academy Awards alongside Hollywood's elite. Her competition included Grace Kelly, Judy Garland, Jane Wyman, and Audrey Hepburn. Though the Oscar ultimately went to Grace Kelly for The Country Girl, Dorothy's nomination alone was groundbreaking. As one contemporary observer put it, her work was extraordinary. The win didn't matter. It was the recognition that was long overdue. At just 32, Dorothy Dandridge had become a permanent part of American film history, celebrated by her peers and beloved by the public. Professionally, she was at her peak, earning as much as $3,500 a week for her club performances at prestigious venues like the Empire Room at New York's Waldorf Astoria. Personally, however, she longed for love and stability. In 1955, she entered into a passionate affair with Carmen Jones director Otto Preminger. Though separated from his wife, Preminger remained married, and his reluctance to make their relationship public cast a shadow over their romance. For a time, he dominated Dorothy's world, controlling what she wore, insisting she appear only in starring roles, and traveling with her to Europe, where he felt freer outside the scrutiny of Hollywood. But his dictatorial influence damaged her career. By forcing her to turn down smaller offers, he left her with fewer opportunities, until the phone eventually stopped ringing. By 1957, Dorothy was disillusioned. At 33, she realized Otto would never divorce his wife, and her 2-year affair ended in heartbreak. By 1956, Dorothy Dandridge had ended her affair with Otto Preminger, but her career had stalled. Nearly 3 years had passed since Carmen Jones had made her a star, and she was desperate for work. That year, she accepted a supporting role in Island in the Sun, an interracial love story starring Harry Belafonte and Joan Fontaine. Dorothy played a local shop clerk opposite British actor John Justin, and though the two characters shared a full-blown romance on screen, the film was riddled with compromises. Studio censors refused to allow Justin's character to say the words "I love you" to Dorothy's, and they barred the actors from kissing. Still, the film was provocative for its time and a box office success, keeping Dorothy's name in the spotlight. Her next film, Tamango, 1958, paired her with German star Kurt Jürgens. On screen, they played lovers, but off-screen their relationship blurred into reality. Once again, Dorothy sought validation in the arms of an older, married white man. It was a painful pattern she repeated often, searching for love and acceptance in relationships that could never give her the stability she craved. That same year, Samuel Goldwyn began production on a lavish film adaptation of Porgy and Bess. Many in the black community opposed the project, believing it reinforced harmful stereotypes. But Dorothy hadn't had a starring role since Carmen Jones. She signed on to play Bess for a then-substantial salary of $75,000. The decision divided her community, with some calling it a betrayal. Tensions only grew when the film's director was fired and replaced by Otto Preminger, Dorothy's former lover. Brilliant but notoriously harsh, Preminger clashed with her constantly. He criticized every gesture, every line, until Dorothy, already fragile, broke down under the pressure. Exhausted and disillusioned, she began to dream of escaping the spotlight altogether. During this period, she turned to Jack Dennison, a handsome nightclub owner who had been pursuing her for years. Friends warned her he was cruel and manipulative, but Dorothy was captivated by his looks and believed she had finally found a chance at stability. On June 22, 1959, she married him. The fantasy unraveled almost immediately. On their honeymoon, Jack admitted he was drowning in debt and pressured Dorothy to perform at his club to keep it afloat, despite the fact that she had financed much of it herself. Days later, she was forced to sing at his struggling venue, a humiliating step down for an actress once hailed as Hollywood's brightest hope. The premiere of Porgy and Bess brought mixed reviews, and Dorothy's marriage quickly devolved into violence and misery. Jack was abusive, both physically and emotionally, and his reckless finances dragged her into ruin. To numb the pain, Dorothy turned increasingly to pills, champagne, and now vodka. What had begun as a hopeful new chapter descended instead into one of the darkest periods of her life. After 3 turbulent years, Dorothy Dandridge divorced Jack Dennison on grounds of extreme cruelty. By then, she was 40 years old, alone, and drowning in debt. She had fallen behind on her mortgage, and her dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs only deepened her despair. On April 24, 1963, photographers captured the once-celebrated star walking into bankruptcy court, a moment that left her humiliated. What pained her most, however, was not her financial collapse. It was losing the ability to care for her daughter. Lynn, now 19 but with the mental capacity of a small child, required full-time, expensive private care. With no way to keep up with the cost, Dorothy was forced to make the heartbreaking decision to place Lynn in state custody. For a woman once hailed as a symbol of progress and possibility for African Americans, it was a devastating low point. By 41, Dorothy was broke, living in a small rented apartment in West Hollywood. With little work and a growing dependency on alcohol, sedatives, and antidepressants, she became increasingly reclusive. Friends like Geraldine Jerry Nicholas and Pearl Bailey remembered long, late-night phone calls where Dorothy used liquor like medicine to numb her pain. She accepted Lynn's disability intellectually, but never emotionally. Guilt consumed her, and untreated depression added to her suffering. Yet she was determined to fight back. Dorothy threw herself into an exhausting routine of exercise and vocal training and enlisted Earl Mills, a trusted colleague, to manage her comeback. By 1965, there were glimmers of hope. She had secured an advance for her autobiography, signed a 2-picture deal with an independent studio, and even delivered a triumphant concert in Albuquerque. She seemed excited about her next big booking at New York's Basin Street East. But on September 8, 1965, Dorothy's story came to a sudden and tragic end. Mills arrived to take her to the airport, but grew alarmed when she didn't answer his calls. Forcing open her apartment door, he found Dorothy collapsed on the bathroom floor. She was just 42 years old. The cause was a fatal overdose of tofranil, her antidepressant. Some believed it was accidental. Others thought she had simply grown too tired to keep fighting. Among her belongings, she left a handwritten note with precise instructions that she be cremated immediately, with any remaining money or possessions left to her mother, Ruby. Dorothy's funeral was held at Forest Lawn Cemetery. Friends and family gathered, including her ex-husband, Harold Nicholas, his brother, Fayard, and her former lover, Peter Lawford. As she wished, she was cremated soon after the service. Though her life was heartbreakingly short, Dorothy Dandridge changed Hollywood forever. She opened doors for black actresses at a time when opportunities were scarce, and her beauty, talent, and courage inspired generations. Actresses like Angela Bassett, Whitney Houston, and Jada Pinkett Smith have all acknowledged that they stand on the path she helped carve. Dorothy may not have lived to see the triumphs of today's black stars, but her legacy lives on, in every boundary broken, in every role claimed, and in every artist who dares to dream of a better Hollywood.